with that first exchange was that people may not have heard the bit that Keir Starmer was referring to from yesterday. So we have heard his response to Ben Bradshaw's question, in which the Prime Minister seemed to be arguing that because we have been a freedom-loving country for 300 years, we couldn't have expected our test and trace system to work as well as localised ones in Germany and France.
Yes.
And it was in response to the Labour MP, whose Christian name escapes me, but I know her surname is Peacock, Stephanie, thank you, when she asked a question about whether or not the inadequacies of the test and trace system would have contributed to the spread of the virus. I mean, we are in truly surreal territory now, but as ever, I think it's important that you have the details you need to arrive at an informed conclusion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sadly, the reason we are facing greater restrictions is because the government have failed to establish an effective testing system. My constituent was not able to access a test for her son, sent home from school and asked to travel 300 miles for a test. Despite the fact I raised this case in this chamber last week and received assurances from the Health Secretary, she still can't get a test and she still has had no contact. Prime Minister, when will you fix the testing system?
Mr. Speaker, I increasingly think it's disgraceful that the Labour opposition continue to blame NHS test and trace for the resurgence of the disease. I really think that is because there is a complete hiatus in their logic. There is a complete hiatus in their logic. They're talking absolute nonsense. It is not testing and tracing has very little or nothing to do with the spread or the transmission of the disease. The spread of the transmission of the disease is caused by contact between human beings and all the things that we're trying to minimise. And that is why, of course, NHS test and trace is vital. But the way to fix the problem now is for the whole country to follow this package of guidance, drive the R down, and allow both education and the economy to continue. But there is a complete flaw in their logic.
Unbelievable. I mean, the idea that you don't reduce infection rates by knowing who's got it, contacting everyone they've come into contact with and telling them all to self-isolate for 2 weeks. This is a strange period of British history, Theo Usherwood.
And of course, the week before, the liaison committee of senior chairmen and women of the select committees, Boris Johnson had said that they admitted the government had failed to get the test, track and trace system up and running. It's also worth referring, of course, to the SAGE advice earlier in the summer. That's the committee which advises the government, which said that a test, track and trace system with results in 24 hours was essential in order to get a grip of
go back to
any
March,
outbreak.
Middle of March, and the World Health Organisation's top man was saying test, test, test.
And Boris Johnson also said in the answer to his first question, to the first question from Keir Starmer, that we're now able to see in granular detail where the outbreaks are imposed local lockdowns. But you'll remember that local leaders, including the Mayor of Leicester and the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, he was saying when there were local outbreaks that they weren't being, local authorities and local mayors and elected politicians weren't being given the granular detail, so they couldn't ask for restrictions to spot the outbreaks and ask for restrictions to be imposed very quickly in hotspots and deal with them in hotspots and then we ended up in a situation where there's a flare-up which it takes over a region, and we have these, they're not really local lockdowns, they're regional lockdowns, northeast, northwest. Yes. 1 million people in Wales are currently under stricter guidelines. Boris Johnson also said that capacity is at a record high. Keir Starmer came back and asked Boris Johnson...
What does that mean?
What did that mean? Capacity rather than
just for people who've forgotten. What's the capacity of this radio show? Can anyone remember? Is it 7 billion people?
7.6 billion.
7.6 billion. But if you count both ears, like they counted both so gloves 14, on PPE, 15, you're looking 15. At 15.2 billion people this programme has the capacity to be listened to by.
You've got some way to go, James.
Thank you.
But Keir Starmer, again, trying to highlight the difference in the defences being offered by the government, saying, is Boris Johnson sticking to the defence of Baroness Dido Harding, which is, we didn't anticipate demand, she told MPs that last week, or the Matt Hancock, he's the Health Secretary, his defence, which was that people were unreasonable to ask for tests if they didn't have symptoms. We were talking earlier about what the Prime Minister's possible defence would be rather than answering the question. He came back with an attack on Keir Starmer, describing the attack on, describing his criticism of Dido Harding as unseemly and unjustified.
And clearly a conscious decision to keep repeating the phrase NHS test and trace as opposed to Serco test and trace or private sector test and trace or indeed Dido Harding's test and trace. I was momentarily distracted by something in the corner of my eye. Did he answer the question of who was right? Is it Dido Harding claiming that they couldn't have predicted that the schools going back in September would see an increase in tests, or Matt Harding's, what's his name? Matt Hancock's argument that the too many people who didn't need tests were going for them? Did he answer that in any way, shape or form?
You need, James O'Brien, a spirit of togetherness.
You're quite right, I do.
That's what the Prime Minister's answer was.
Well, mine's a double.
Spirit of togetherness. And he repeated that in the final answer. Of course, you're talking about the attacks that come back with the final answer, that Keir Starmer needed to show a much greater spirit of togetherness. Keir Starmer pointed to the fact that his wife and sister work for the NHS, and so he wasn't going to take lessons from the Prime Minister on supporting our national
strong
health.
line, that,
yes.
Actually, very strong, because that is why it is, I presume, NHS test and trace. They're trying to somehow conflate the people we clapped for on Thursday nights with the test and trace's failure, as if we're somehow criticising the people we clap. We're not. We're criticising politicians and Dido Harding. Theo Usherwood, many thanks. Quick apology from me. An update here. My listening capacity is now, I'm told, 7.86 billion people on this programme, not a paltry 7.6 billion that we suggested a moment ago. And that is, of course, if you count 2 ears as one person. If you were to count each ear as an individual listening capacity constituent, then we'd be up to more.